To get us started, I'll just have everyone quickly introduce themselves and tell a bit about who they are and where they work. We'll start with Emma Philpott first. Hi, Emma.
Hi, good morning. I'm Emma Philpott. I'm the CEO of IASME. So IASME is the NCSC's Cyber Essentials partner. So we run the whole of the Cyber Essentials scheme at the moment. We also have a governance certification scheme, which is IASME Governance, which goes a bit further than Cyber Essentials. And we're just launching an Internet of Things certification scheme and a counter-fraud certification scheme. But I think most of the discussion today will be about Cyber Essentials. We certify about 1,800 companies every month, and about 3/4 of them are micro or small organizations. So that's companies with less than 50 people. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion today.
Great, thanks. We'll also bring up the other Emma, Emma Sell from Fox and Partners. Hi, Emma.
Morning, Kaylee. Morning, everyone. Yeah, I'm Emma Sell, the COO at Fox and Partners. I joined there just over a year ago in a new role. We're a boutique employment and partnership firm, probably about 20 employees in total. And I guess I'm going to be coming at this from a practical point of view, kind of dealing with things on the ground.
Great, thanks, Emma. And finally, Paul Maxwell from our partner at Stratia Cyber. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Emma. Hi, everybody. I'm Paul Maxwell. I'm a security consultant. I know it says my title's director, but I was one of the founding directors of Stratia Cyber. We're a specialist cybersecurity firm. We're NCSC certified and assured to deliver cybersecurity services. We're also a CREST certified company, so we do penetration testing, and we actually deliver services for IASME and Cyber Essentials Plus, so we can get you Cyber Essentials Plus certified, but also the IASME certification as well. On a personal note, I've been doing cybersecurity for the past 25 years. I guess even before it was called cyber, to be perfectly honest. I've delivered services into the Ministry of Justice, Home Office, but also done recently some incident response stuff into some private law firms. I'd just like to thank you for attending here today, so thank you.
Thanks, Paul. We'll start with you, Paul. I'm wondering if you could give us a brief overview of the current cybersecurity landscape and some of the challenges that you're seeing during the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, the pandemic drove sort of massive, rapid change across all sectors. One of the main ones, or the two main ones, is actually the sort of the drive to digitize your services, and also everybody effectively, if they could work from home, would work from home. I mean, I live in Spain. I work from home anyway, so it's kind of the norm for me. But what that did, the main challenge with that was that sort of rapid movement of IT changing meant that there's a possibility that you didn't fully understand your risks. And we're in the process with some companies is now trying to understand and mop those risks up and understand and drive some sort of process and procedure into it. I think the longer term challenge, which I think certainly cybersecurity companies or security to areas of the business will have to now feature is that businesses now understand that you can do things a little bit quicker than you did before from a security perspective. So now they're going to have to look at how you can embed those processes to make your business a bit more agile.
Absolutely. Emma Sell, how about from your perspective, how are you seeing things in quite a relatively new firm as well? There are lots going on at Fox and Partners.
Yeah, I mean, when we went to lockdown, I mean, before pre-lockdown, I think we had sort of maybe 4 or 5 lawyers and myself working from home 1 day a week, but that was it. And I mean, we were in a kind of the equivalent of a COBRA meeting discussing our strategy, what we were going to do when a lockdown looked imminent. But actually, while we were in that meeting, Boris made his announcement. So we only had 2 days to get everything in order. I guess the main challenges were support staff who aren't used to working from home and getting our telephones all diverted and making sure that, you know, there was complete business continuity. Following up on what Paul said, actually, one of the things that was a big challenge was not everybody had their own firm hardware. So we were asking people to use their own computers, laptops, phones, at least to start with. So the main challenge was actually making sure our policies were all up to date and actually relevant, because we found that whilst they were relevant for working in the office, they didn't necessarily work from home. So that was kind of the main challenge initially. There's been lots more as we've gone on that we've found, but that was kind of the main thing.
Yeah. And how about you, Emma Philpott, from your perspective, working with firms and going through the cybersecurity, Cyber Essentials accreditations?
So obviously the biggest problem was everyone suddenly had to work from home. And so, as Emma said, a lot of people were asked to use their home devices. So, to start with, I know people were doing their best, but as time went on, we saw more companies trying to make their networks secure. However, we still see people, however many months later, still filling in their Cyber Essentials assessment as if they're all in the office, and they're not. And when we say, this is meant to be at the time assessment, so you're meant to fill it in with everybody at home, they say, oh no, that's just temporary, so I'm filling it in as if we're in the office. That's not okay anymore. Things have changed. So it's really getting companies to accept that this, at least for now, is the new normal, and they have to have secure setups, even if everyone's working from home. So that it is quite a big deal for companies to accept that.
Absolutely. MSL, I would like to get a little bit deeper into some of those processes that you went through when you were getting people working from home in a secure manner. What were some of the challenges around specifically security and using hardware devices and kind of managing IT remotely?
Yeah, I mean, the main challenge was with people using their own devices. I mean, we work from a secure VPN within Citrix for all of our work, but you can't be watching what people are downloading or doing outside of our VPN and putting things locally on their machine. So it was just a lot of communication with them and making them aware of sort of the increased threat now that everybody's working from home. Our IT is actually outsourced to a third party, all of it. So we didn't have anything on site, but it suddenly sort of we became very aware that we didn't actually know what our IT people were doing in terms of cyber and exactly how they were looking after us. So I arranged a very long, convoluted meeting, very technical, to try and understand exactly what systems we had in place and how they were monitoring it, how they were mitigating the risk. And I now have meetings with them every month to kind of get an update on what's new, what's happening in the cyber world. And then I try and put that into layman's terms and report back to the whole team at least once a month, and I send an update out once a week just with a brief kind of look out for this, here's what's new, here's what to be aware of. I mean, I think Paul and I have discussed this before. You can do what you can in terms of telling people, but at the end of the day, it's down to the user. So increased training, definitely.
Yeah. How are you seeing that, Paul, from your perspective as an IT helper in the space?
Yeah, I have to agree with Emma from that perspective. Is that sort of rapid move to use whatever you could do to get keep the business running is now starting to people are starting to clarify their positions from a security perspective. But I think the SRA did a survey back in September, and there's still companies out there that don't have no cybersecurity knowledge or posture at all, and it makes you wonder how they actually managed their risks when COVID struck, and if the businesses are still going, to be perfectly honest. So that's the kind of thing that we've been seeing.
Yeah. Emma Philpott, I'd just be interested to see, have you had more uptick in people actually going to Cyber Essentials for the first time and going through that process since lockdown has started? And kind of what has that process been like during the pandemic? How is that different to what it was like before?
So when it first struck, the number of certifications dropped by about 65% because people had other things on their mind. They didn't want to be doing Cyber Essentials. They were just trying to keep their businesses going. So that was really understandable. And that lasted a couple of months. But since then, it has picked up and grown significantly. So this last month, as I said, we certified almost 1,900 companies, which is an increase of about 45% on what it was in February. So we've had quite a big increase in the number of people doing Cyber Essentials. I don't think that's necessarily companies that go, oh, I know, let's do Cyber Essentials. it's customers mainly who are worried, and rightly so. How are their supply chains and their, the people that they work with dealing with this kind of situation? And so they ask them, please, can you do Cyber Essentials? But even if you don't need a certificate, just looking at the controls can be really useful. And even if you just do some of them, bearing in mind you're all working from home, try and meet those controls can really make a big difference.
We have a question from the audience who asks, what are the biggest changes to life that home workers have had to make to be properly filling in their cyber essentials in a working from home capacity? Emma Philpott, why don't you take that one?
So as has been mentioned before, one of the biggest changes has been asking people to use their own devices and their own Wi-Fi. So when you're in an organization and you've all got, a protected network and you've got company issued devices, that's relatively, low risk usually. When you're using your own devices on the same Wi-Fi as your kids, maybe downloading gaming cheats, that becomes really, really risky. And when you're asking people to use their home devices, they could be really out of date, like Windows XP, and that Windows XP isn't supported anymore. The number of vulnerabilities in Windows XP, it's like living in a house, not even with no locks on the doors, with no doors, using some of these old operating systems and old devices. But of course, at home, people use them. So suddenly, people are using out-of-date devices with known vulnerabilities and non-secured Wi-Fi. I think that's some of the most dangerous. And of course, when that first happened, it was a shock to everyone, including the cyber criminals. Whereas now the cyber criminals have had time to get their act together, and they are really beginning to use that situation to attack people.
Paul, I see you nodding your head in agreement there. Do you have anything to add on that?
Absolutely, certainly on Emma's point about the cyber criminals. The NCSC, I think, have intercepted, I think it's 22,000 malicious websites and URLs since the start of the pandemic, and have had reports on over 2 million suspicious emails. So it just shows you sort of the uptick on the cyber criminal activity just to the general population.
Yeah. MSL, I'd be interested to hear your perspective about the firm. I think you're just on your journey to do Cyber Essentials now, is that right?
That's right, yeah. Actually, I'm interested in listening to Emma say about it needing to be changed working from home, because we had started it in the office and we've had to redo it. So we are going through that now. And actually, we weren't actually going to do the official accreditation. We were just going to go through and make sure we were compliant. But we have, just to confirm what Emma said, we have had clients ask us about our cyber and security and what measures we're taking. So we have decided to go and get the official accreditation so that it's on our website and so that people can see we are doing what we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question that I have around working from home best practice is the issue around increased risk in printing. I know we were talking about how there's been some challenges and how you talk to partners about what's okay in terms of client data and printing at home. Emma, what's that experience been like?
Yeah, it's been very difficult to monitor, and also the type of work we do. It just so happened that as we went into lockdown, we've had 2 or 3 big litigation cases as well, and it's been very difficult trying to view kind of large documents and go through them, mark them up. So we've had to upgrade quite a lot of our technology systems as well to cope with that and try and discourage people from printing. The only way really around it for people that don't have their own kind of shredders and things like that is for bundles when they've not been needed. We've just asked people to box them up and been literally arranging couriers to come and collect them, take them back into the office to put it all in a secure environment. And then when somebody can go into the office, they arrange a confidential waste collection, but it's logistically quite difficult.
Yeah. Paul, do you have any advice around that challenge, or what have you been seeing in the market?
I think pretty much what Emma has just said. There's only so much you can do with paper. You just have to protect it and have some sort of a chain of evidence about where it's gone. So if something does go missing or pops up where it shouldn't do, you at least understand where it's come from.
Absolutely. And Emma Philpott, do you, I guess also from your perspective as a wider client data handling management point of view? What are you seeing in the space? What is your advice for people working from home with client data?
Yeah, so I think just thinking through the risks is really important. And it's not always obvious until you actually sit down and think, okay, what are the risks? You know, if someone printed something out and then the house was burgled and it was taken, what would the consequences be, and what would happen to the people involved? So it's really thinking through those risks and then deciding what you need to do. But you can't really decide what you need to do until you've decided what the risk is, if you see what I mean. But yeah, I mean, we've considered buying little tiny shredders for everybody, trying to get people, as you mentioned, to print out less. But yeah, it's quite a unique problem, really.
Yeah.
Sorry, just to add to that, this could be one of the good things that comes out of the working remotely, is that hopefully that will involve some changed behaviours when we get back to the office, and that hopefully my wish for a paperless office might be some way closer.
Do you think firms are going down that route? Not just firms, but also I've heard that it's not just a problem internally for getting internal buy-in for using less paper, but also the courts and regulation. It doesn't really allow for, or hasn't in the past allowed for quite so a digital process. Are you seeing a change in that sphere, MSL?
Yeah, I can't really speak for the courts, but we've definitely noticed it with barristers as well, who used to want lots of paper bundles or A5 bundles and various different kind of ways of printing. But now they just want one PDF with everything that they can edit and annotate. And I think definitely we've seen the barristers chambers embracing it, actually.
I just want to point out or bring out a point that you mentioned earlier, Emma, about working with outsourced and managed IT providers. You said you had to go through and had some long discussions and kind of cement that relationship now that everyone's working more remotely. What are some of what was that process like? What were the conversations that you had with them, and what were your findings or advice around that area for people who are also outsourcing their IT?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing was we've just trusted them implicitly and just didn't have a handle on what they were doing, because we don't have any internal IT department. So it was really kind of going through the back end of the whole system and kind of them showing us, and it was quite eye-opening actually, exactly how many things they're blocking, what they're doing, and kind of explaining. Actually, the useful thing was for me to be able to explain to the team, this is why you can't put a USB in your computer, this is why you can't do this is why you can't download this. And because it's, from a user perspective, it can be quite frustrating, not being able to do certain things within the VPN environment. But it was useful now that people understand it. It's actually been a lot easier to communicate with them.
Yeah. We just have another question from the audience, but before I get to that, Paul, I wanted to know if you had any advice around working with outsourcers or managed IT providers during this time.
Yeah, of course. I think 3/4 of firms rely on commercial IT, to provide their sort of the back end services. One of the most important things to actually, as Emma said earlier, is understand your risks, understand the sensitivity of the information that they're dealing with, the business processes. And understand who your suppliers are, how deep do you want to go down into their supply chain as well, and understand what it actually means to your company. There's a sort of a full process that the NCSE have on their website that you can go through. It's all about building into your contractual arrangements with them, understanding how to work with them, but also to build trust and sort of encourage sort of continual improvement. If there's a breach at their end, make sure they report it, so that it doesn't go under the radar and you get caught out later. So that sort of thing.
Our question, we've got quite a few now. One asks, what software have the panelists found most secure for sending large documents electronically and quickly? They mentioned that they are a solicitor firm sending large amounts of data, which is confidential and sometimes sensitive. Paul, why don't you take that one?
It's not. I'd rather if Emma Sell did that, because we don't do that.
That's fair, Emma.
We don't advise on products.
are in the process of upgrading our case management, document management system. We use iManage, and there's a new product through that called iManage Share, which is kind of like a data room, sends a link. But while we're waiting for that upgrade, we've been using a product called Cornerstone, which is essentially a data room. We found it really easy to use because we was finding we couldn't send zip files, they weren't secure enough. So it's a completely secure environment that sends a link to your clients or counsel, whoever, and they can download the documents through the link, amend them, whatever, and then put them back in there as well, and you can download them back onto the system. So yeah, Cornerstone is what we've been using, recommended by our IT people as being very secure, but yeah.
Great. Adrian Barker asks, how have you managed giving access to third parties, such as cost draftsmen, who are usually have visited the site, visited to sit at a desk and go through the paper file?
We haven't had that specific situation arise. We have had something similar with our accountants needing to carry out our audit, where they would normally come and sit in the office and go through the bills folders, you know, all the invoices, everything else. To get around that, we actually just asked our IT people to set them up as a new user, as if they were an employee of the firm, and gave them access to all of our account system. And made them sign confidentiality agreements. But yeah, I mean, we just had to set them up as a new user. We couldn't find another way around it.
Just on that last point, Tracy Sullivan has said that their firm uses ShareFile or Egress. Do you have any, have you heard of those products? Do you know anything about that, MSL?
No, haven't heard of them. Sorry.
Well, other options are available on the market. Emma Philpott, we have a question for you. What's the difference between Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus?
Okay, so Cyber Essentials is you just answer the questions. So it's a list of self-assessment questions, which you can just download from our website for free. You just go, you get access to the secure platform, you answer the questions, and then an independent assessor will go through and mark your answers. But of course, that assumes that you understand your network, and it assumes you understand the questions. So the much more high assurance one is Cyber Essentials Plus. So Cyber Essentials Plus, you still have to go through and answer all the questions, but then an independent expert, like one of Paul's team, will actually do a technical audit of your systems. So that involves an internal and external vulnerability scan, and just sort of doing an audit of a random number of end user devices to check that the software is up to date. So I don't think I know of any organization that goes through a Cyber Essentials Plus and doesn't find one or two little things that they need to change. And this is just the basic technical controls, but it's all about housekeeping. So even us, I mean, we do Cyber Essentials Plus each year, and every single time there is, you know, a computer that the patch hasn't taken, or, you know, some little thing that we've forgotten and would be a way in probably or potentially for a cyber criminal. And so Cyber Essentials Plus is a bit more expensive because you're paying for that cybersecurity expert to do the audit. But the basic level Cyber Essentials is only £300. But certainly if you can afford it, the Cyber Essentials Plus is the one that will give you and your customers better assurance.
Great. We have another question, I think, Paul, probably for you, who asks, how safe is it to use cloud-based services such as Outlook via Office 365?
It's relatively safe. They're industry standard, so it really all depends on what your administrator set up at the back end. So if you're actually running it yourself, there is actually security settings that you can use to enhance the security of Office 365, multi-factor authentication. You can put tracking on files with time factors on them. You can enforce encryption. There's lots of, so it really depends on how well you set it up and what your risks are and what's relevant for your business.
Alan asks, they say that their firm is using MS Onedrive to share password protected links to documents with barristers and experts. He asks, is this secure enough? Paul, do you have advice on that? They use OneDrive.
So you have OneDrive where you have all your password protected links in it that all your business can access. It's probably need a bit more context around the actual the question to understand what the full risks are. But I'm quite happy if they want to drop me an email and I can have a chat with them after about it.
Great. Someone else asks, how important is it to ban staff from using work emails for personal matters? Paul, do you have any advice on that?
Yeah, I mean that should be part of your sort of acceptable use policy or your email policy. If you're using it for personal matters to log into Facebook or you don't want to really associate your work email address with your personal activities.
Emma Philpott, is there anything in your space that advises or I guess adds on top of what not and what to do during emails?
So Cyber Essentials, it's just a few technical controls, which means that if someone does do something bad, like clicking on a link or something, then it will hopefully mitigate the problems that come afterwards. But IASME governance, which is a much wider assessment and certification scheme, that does include things like staff training, policies, security policy, acceptable use policy, and that's where not using your personal email address, your work email address for your personal things, that's where that comes. So Cyber Essentials is just 5 technical controls. Those are the absolute basics, and those stop the majority of the cyber attacks. But IASME governance goes the next step, and that is the assessment, the policies and the business continuity plans and all the other really important things that Cyber Essentials doesn't cover.
I'll just add to that, if that's okay. I can't recall the name of the website now. Paul may know it, but I can dig it out and send it on to you afterwards. But there's a website where we carried out an audit of everybody's work email address to find out how often they were being used in a personal context. And the list was long, being used for kind of gaming, logins and various things. And we kind of went to every individual that was named on the list and just said, have you used your Citrix password for this? Because obviously quite often people use the same passwords a lot of the time. And we had to ask them to change their email and log in and their Citrix password just in case it had been compromised. But it was quite a laborious task, but I think the message got through. People don't want to be contacted and told off. But yeah, it's surprising how often people do use their work email addresses for personal.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's why it's really important if you can implement sort of a multi-factor authentication on your work-based email system and logins. It certainly mitigates a lot of that threat and risk.
I'd like to touch on some of the challenges around remote training during this time. Obviously, a lot of firms are auditing their systems and talking to IT providers and trying to figure out how to best work digitally. MSL, I don't know how you found remote training people or I guess managing that.
Oh, sorry, you froze, Kaylee. Can you still hear me? I can't hear anyone else, I'm afraid.
I can hear you.
Oh,
I can hear you.
Good.
Yeah.
It's actually been very difficult. We've had 2 new joiners, 2 lawyers join us during the pandemic. Because funnily enough, employment law's big business at the moment. But it's been very difficult, certainly not just from an IT training perspective, but also from embedding the culture and embedding people into the firm. But it's just been a lot of Zoom and shared screens, really. There's been no other way around it.
Paul, how have you found working with firms remotely during this time?
It's been relatively easy transition. I say we're a sort of a virtual organisation anyway. A lot of the time we do spend on client site, but with the pandemic we've been able to move out into our sort of home offices quite easily. We've developed some software so that we can do remote vulnerability scanning, remote pen testing, etc., into various organisations. So what would normally have somebody sat in a server room for a day doing the testing, we're now able to do it from another location. So it's worked okay.
Great. And Emma Philpott, I know you mentioned how the difference in Cyber Essentials and doing that from home, but how have you been managing that relationship with clients?
Well, from Cyber Essentials Plus, where you need to do a remote audit, a technical audit, we used to insist that the assessors went to the client site. And of course, that wasn't going to work. But we've seen all our certification bodies, like Stratia, invest in the kind of tools that means that they can do exactly the same tests remotely. And so almost all Cyber Essentials Plus tests have just been able to go ahead, without any issue at all. So that's been really, really good. And I think it reduces the cost for the client because, of course, you're not paying for them to actually come to your site. So it reduces the travel and subsistence costs. So I think that's a really good thing to come out of this. In terms of us, I mean, we have more than doubled in size since April because of taking on the Cyber Essentials scheme. And so half our company, I have not really met. It's really, really strange. And more worryingly, they haven't met their colleagues. So it has been really difficult. We went through a phase of trying to arrange lunches, in groups of 6, but of course that's stopped again now. And we have, regular catch-ups, and we have a book club. We have a virtual exercise challenge going on, just trying to think of ways where people can talk to each other and feel part of the team without necessarily being in the same room together. And we're really looking forward to our Christmas party this year. It's an online virtual escape room. So, these kind of things, we're doing our best, but obviously it's not as easy as being in the same room together.
Mm-hmm. In terms of working with clients or firms going through the Cyber Essentials Plus, doing that assessment, do you think that you'll change tactic and do more remote, or at least allow more remote assessments after this whole pandemic blows over?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we've said to the certification bodies, you still have to follow the test spec exactly. So you can only do Cyber Essentials Plus tests remotely if you can still do everything we asked of you. And they have really stepped up, and they can. And it's really brilliant. So there's no reason to change. Once the pandemic's gone away, hooray, I can't see that the remote Cyber Essentials Pluses will change. There's a few companies that you can't do a remote Cyber Essentials Plus on due to, the sensitive nature of what they do. And so they will still have to be on site. But everyone else, I think there's no reason to go back.
Great. I'd like to talk a little bit about cyber reporting now. Emma, I know it was a topic that we briefly covered before this session. How has cyber reporting changed since the pandemic, and what are your key takeaways from there?
I mean, it's just increased. I used to send an update to the team once a month on kind of just things to look out for and just to remind them of best practice. But like I say, I have my meeting once a month with the IT guys specifically about cyber attacks and what's new on the market, I guess. But that never happened before, so that's very good. And yeah, and that's meant that I've upgraded to emailing the team once a week. I've signed up for the Law Society do a good cyber email they send out quite regularly, and there's a few other companies, and I've just signed up to get everything that I can, and also just having a look on Twitter as well, because they're not just specific to law firms, it's everything. So just kind of pooling it all together, and it's taken up quite a lot more of my time than it ever used to, but we've kind of recognised the importance of it now.
Yeah, Paul, have you seen changes in that space?
Yeah, well, we kind of monitor a lot of that stuff anyway, but something that's probably quite useful for people on the call is the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Partnership, which is known as CISP. It's a government-run portal that provides threat and risk analysis on a kind of a weekly basis from the NCSC. You can sign up to the portal, and you can. I think there's a specific legal services group there. They've got maritime. They've got all sorts of different groups, and it's a really useful resource that gets it pretty much straight from the horse's mouth from a cybersecurity perspective.
Yeah. Emma Philpott, I don't know if you have any advice on that space.
No, not really, except to just echo what Paul says. CISP is really great. It can be quite technical, but not all of it is. So I think it's finding the right groups for you. And yeah, it's sometimes when there's an attack going on, it could be quite exciting because people keep updating. Oh, this is happening, which, you know, that's quite exciting. But also, of course, you see companies saying, oh, I've had that attack, and oh, I've had that attack. And you think, oh, okay, that's something for me to watch out for.
Paul, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the current threats that you're seeing. I know we talked a little bit about cybersecurity in the beginning, but have you seen an uptick in, you mentioned phishing attacks and other email challenges? What's been going on?
Absolutely, it's pretty much sort of more of the same that's been going on over the past year. Ransomware attacks are going up. I think one of the changes now is that even if a company's been pay the ransomware, they've not necessarily been getting the keys to decrypt their information. So that's obviously is not a good way forward. Attacks on VPNs have increased, and a lot to do with that is sort of the rapid deployment of VPNs and home workers. Phishing attacks all on an increase, but I think NCSE are trying their best to try and remove as much of that sort of malicious content from the internet before it kind of gets to us.
Do you would you advise against law firms paying a ransom if that was something threat to them?
I think the standard advice is you don't deal with the terrorists and hostage takers, do you? You know, it's you don't pay it because there's no guarantee you're going to get your encryption keys anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Emma Philpott, I don't know if you have anything else around threats in the market right now.
Well, I think cyber criminals, you know, they're clever and they are agile, and so anything that changes and they're right there. So they feed off people's fears, and so particularly phishing attacks that need you to do something really urgently and really immediately. Anything that comes through that you're not expecting, that asks for something quickly and urgently, or something bad will happen, always be suspicious of those emails. As Paul said, ransomware is just, you know, the amount of ransomware attacks is just going up and up and up. And now they don't just tend to lock your files, they seem to take some of it. So first of all, they'll say pay to have your files unlocked. Of course, often that doesn't happen. And then they say, by the way, we've got all your customers' data, pay for us to not publish it. So that it's kind of the next step in ransomware. Of course, the really important thing to do in those cases is have an offline backup, because if it's a backup that's just connected to your computer, it can also be locked up. So having an offline backup and thinking about what would you do, because the worst thing is something happens and you've never even thought about it. Even though it's painful to go there in your mind, think about what would happen if I got a message saying, well, my files have been locked, or I'm about to leak data of your clients onto the internet. Just sort of think, okay, what would I do? And having been through those steps means that when it does happen, if it does happen, you're just in a much better position.
Absolutely. We're getting into business continuity space now, an area that I would like to cover, and surely a lot of firms are reevaluating what that business continuity plan looks like. I'm sure pandemic wasn't on the list of criteria. MSL, I don't know if you guys have been changing that or what you're seeing in your BCIP.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously had a business continuity plan in place, but it has been changed slightly to incorporate full-time working from home. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting to hear about the offline backup, because we had initially been thinking our kind of business continuity and ransomware things were more targeted around client money and things like that. And we always considered ourselves low risk because we don't hold lots of client money. But yeah, when we carried out kind of a proper assessment, we kind of realized actually we hold a lot of people's data and very highly sensitive and confidential information about sometimes quite high profile people. So it's just regularly carrying out that risk assessment as well and making sure it's relevant to what you're doing. And yeah, I mean, it's just been very challenging.
Yeah, we have a couple more questions. I'll ask Nadia asks, how important is it to have a written security policy in place? Yeah, Paul?
Yeah, I'm happy. Yeah, it's fundamental, really. You need to make sure that it's clear, concise, and simple to understand. If it's not written down, there's no guarantee people will do it or follow it. But the important thing about any policies are that people are made aware of them and they understand them.
How is there a how often would you advise firms revisit that policy and make sure that it is most effective, up to date?
It's normally on if there's any sort of major changes. For instance, the pandemic's quite a major change, so they'd look at that. But normally an annual review cycle aligned to, if you've got any certification, it's normally aligned to that sort of life cycle.
We have another question from Adrian, who asks, action fraud seems to be for actual events where loss has occurred. Are there any recommendations for reporting the most sophisticated phishing and fraud attempts in the interest of pooling knowledge between firms?
Okay, well, I'm happy to start on that one from a generic sort of cyber perspective. You can report any security instance to the NCSE via their website, but also you've got, we touched on the CISP portal as well. You've got a legal sector group there, which you could actually be part of. And I think basically everything that goes on in there is meant to stay within that group as well. So there's sort of no leakage of data.
Emma Philpott, I don't know if you have any recommendations for reporting sophisticated attempts and kind of sharing that knowledge between the community.
So if you have slightly dodgy emails, any emails, there's an email address that you can forward it to at NCSC. It's relatively new. They've only been doing it for about 6 months, and they pool all of those. And out of that, they then go and try and shut down organizations and websites that are sending out a lot of phishing attacks. So just in terms of any phishing attack, forward it to the NCSC website, which email address, which you'll be able to find on their website. And I would echo Paul, CISP is a really great place to share this kind of information and understand, who else in the legal sector is going to see these things.
MSL, I'm not sure how active you are in that space and kind of looking at what the market is up to. Is that a job to you in the firm, or is that something you talk to with your IT provider?
It is a job for me in the firm. I was just quickly writing notes down because that was new to me. I didn't know where to report it or where the groups were to kind of share that information. So that's been really useful for me, actually.
Great. Just a little bit more about business continuity plans. I'm wondering if there's a specific structure or certain things that should be on a business continuity. I know it's ever growing now with increased risks and new types of attacks. Paul, I don't know if you have any, a format or any suggestions around how you go about putting something like that together.
Yeah, so there's an international standard for business continuity, which you could look at. I suppose the important thing with business continuity is to understand any changes in your environment since your last business continuity plan, or if you actually had one in the first place. But it's about understanding what's important to your business, what critical systems, processes, how long you can survive with those processes broken down or removed, and to understand if you've got any third-party dependencies. And from that, you should be able to understand what the risks are and where you want to put those business continuity measures in place. But I'd always, whenever we've done it in the past, is we tend to do like a tabletop exercise at the end with the relevant stakeholders to see if it's actually relevant, it works, and that actually acts as an awareness activity as well, so that to get everybody engaged.
Is there a balance between physical procedures like incidents in the case of fires or floods versus digital procedures? Is there, do you approach those differently, or what's your advice around there?
They've both got the same fundamentals. You want to keep the business running, don't you? But there is specific guidance for cyber attacks, which is through NIST or CREST that you can follow. So approach them the same way, but with sort of subtle differences because it's just a different event.
Yeah. MSL, I don't know if since you are kind of reviewing that at the moment. What are you seeing?
I would only add that as well as the technical and IT security risks, we've also added in something about the commercial risks and damage and reputational damage as well within our business continuity plan, kind of properly assessing when to inform the clients, which clients have been affected, and also we kind of have got on board on standby a third party PR company to manage that, because the last thing you want to be doing is that on top of trying to sort out any kind of security breach and dealing with the information, the ICO. It's kind of, when do you take those steps and who needs to be told, and minimizing damage to reputation as well.
Great.
Much more relevant with cyber than with kind of flood or fire.
Yeah. In our last 10 minutes, I'd like to talk about what this new normal would look like, what you guys are envisioning in terms of what both the challenges, but also opportunities to work differently and better, both in security space, but also just in general, a more risk averse or risk aware world. Emma Philpott, what are you seeing in the future?
Well, I think obviously it's had caused its difficulties, suddenly all working from home. And I think we've discussed the issue of people not being able to get together. But there's lots and lots of positive things, which certainly our company will continue. So some people really find it better to work from home. They can concentrate better. And a number of our staff have been much, much happier since working from home. And so it's helped us understand that, we need to be much more flexible. Not everyone has to go into the office. And as long as you have the security planning and equipment in place, people can work from home and be secure. It's helped us to use many more online tools, which has made us much more efficient. So Confluence and Jira in terms of project management and assigning tasks, and Teams, Microsoft Teams, just in terms of communicating with people. And we've actually had team members say to us that they feel more in the know and part of the team and in the loop by using group chats on Teams than they ever did in a noisy office where they didn't really, didn't feel part of what was going on. So also, we've been able to employ people from all over the UK. So because we are not tied to an office anymore, we have people across the UK that are equally part of the team as everyone else. So just in terms of us working, I think we've learned a lot, and we'll come out of the pandemic being a much stronger and more efficient and more agile organization than before.
Great. How about you, Emma? What are you seeing as we go toward the future of the new normal?
Yeah, I would echo entirely everything Emma Philpott said, actually. It was a very, very steep and mostly painful learning curve to start with, but we feel like we're coming out the other side, definitely from an IT and security point of view. And if and when we do go back to the office, full or part-time, whatever that looks like, feel a lot more confident about the systems we've got in place now. And much more IT efficiencies have been created. I think, we've had, and also actually before lockdown, we were going to have to look at expanding our office space, taking on a bit more space. And obviously that's completely out of the window now. We don't need any bigger space if we need an office at all. But I think some people would like to go back. I'd definitely like to go back 1 or 2 days a week just to see some actual real people. But I think, we found people have really embraced it. It's become a lot more flexible. I think possibly people with children would like to be back in the office now. But it's nice. We've realised that actually we can trust our employees. Everything's getting done actually probably more efficiently than it was in the office. We've actually really embraced it now. But
Are you discussing what the office space will look like following the pandemic? I know a lot of firms are already putting in pandemic procedures or sanitary procedures in place. But is that on your radar yet?
It is. We did go back to the office in between lockdowns. I think that lasted 3 weeks on a rotated basis. But it was very much making people aware that it was entirely their decision. We wanted them to feel comfortable travel, because it was mainly actually the commuting and the travel that people were wary about. And I think that's how we will going forwards. I think it'll be very much people's personal choice, whatever they're comfortable with. I think that's. I can't see us all going back full time ever again.
Great. Paul, what's the future look like for you? You're basically already working in the future.
Yeah, so it's something that Stratia has done pretty much since we started. We made a decision to be a virtual company. We have mailing addresses, so all our staff work from home unless the client wants them to work on site. So we have all the Teams things. We've been using it for a couple of years, and all the secure infrastructure to enable us to work that way anyway. But what it has meant is because now the clients are quite happy for us to work at home and still see the value, that it's kind of accelerated that sort of working from outside the office timeline that was always kind of happening, and it's been great from our perspective. A lot of my staff are a lot happier that they're working from home instead on a client site. So it's been pretty good for us, to be fair.
Great. Great. I think our last 5 minutes, I know we've covered quite a lot in our discussion today, but if you had one key takeaway that each of you, for people listening today, whether that's something to audit, to go back to the firm to review their processes, or just to keep an eye out for, what would that one thing or one key takeaway be? Emma Philpott, I'll start with you.
So it's have an offline backup, everybody, please. And also just bear in mind the risks of working from home. I know that's what the whole of this event has been, but it is actually thinking about the reality of how your employees are working. So if they're using out-of-date software, if they're using the same computer as their kids do, who do gaming and cheats, that's a very, very significant vulnerability. So think about the reality of the situation that your staff are working in, and consider getting some dedicated hardware for them to use. That's my one takeaway.
Great. MSL?
Probably the key takeaway is just regularly training staff and communicating with them. Even if you're repeating yourself every week, we found that it does sink in, and people are double checking emails. I'd much rather people emailed me, is this spam, rather than just opening it. And it's working, because I'm getting a lot more of those emails from people, and it always is spam. So yeah, just regularly communicating and drilling the message.
Great. And Paul, what are your key takeaways?
In addition to the points from both of the Emmas there, I think being part of a community like CESP, where you can talk to people in the same position with you, is really important to help you understand how you move forward with your cybersecurity posture.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I think that was a lot to digest, some really good takeaways for firms.